Wrestling Podcast with the Enforcer.
I believe they're called enforcers, Gordon. I sell women's shoes.
And the Stallion.
Stallion, baby! I am not what you would call a handsome man. I'll kick you in the nuts and you'll smile at me and like it all night long.
Welcome back to another edition of the All Night Long Wrestling Podcast. Well, I guess I shouldn't say welcome back because I don't think anybody listened last week.
No.
They did. So no, I'm just kidding. We're working you.
No, you're serious. That's
no. We're working the dressing room here. That's what we're doing. We're keep taking people behind the scenes and we're lying to them. They call working the boys. I feel that's a weird sentence, huh? You working the boys?
I wish we were muted this whole time.
Yeah, speaking of working the boys, his name is the Stallion. My name is the Enforcer. We are the All Night Long Wrestling Podcast. I'd like to, and we want me to welcome you back anyway. Welcome back to yet another edition. Before anything, I appreciate everybody that took the time to rate and review and subscribe to us last week on iTunes. It was much appreciated. Why are you looking at me like that?
I don't know who you're talking to, I guess would be my first question.
Anyway, we sincerely,
Siri might rate us.
So we got a couple things to talk about this week. First and foremost, we here at the All Night Long Wrestling Podcast would like to take a minute to give our thoughts and pay our respects to the greatest professional wrestling personality of all time, Bobby Heenan. Bobby Heenan passed away earlier this week at the age of, I believe it was 73. There were conflicting reports. Some people said 72. Some people said 73. You and I have done a couple of 5 counts on here, and the topics were best manager and best announcer. And I'm pretty sure for both of us, Bobby Heenan was top of both those lists.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that he was, if
not top
near the
two.
top.
Yeah, he. For me, growing up watching professional wrestling, Bobby Heenan was the voice, I guess you could say, of my generation. My young one, I should say, because later on it became JR and Jerry Lawler. But Bobby Heenan was the first person I really remember listening to. He's the first manager that I remember seeing. My earliest memories, I think the earliest memory I have of Bobby Heenan was when, I think it was Rude versus Warrior, and he lost the match, got knocked out by the Ultimate Warrior, and he woke up in the weasel suit. Was that Rude?
I don't remember if it might have been Rude. I do remember the ending of it, though.
The skit. And Bobby Heenan was like the slapstick comedian of the WWF at that point. There was nobody, for my money, that has done it better, that even comes close to what Bobby Heenan was able to do. And I think one of a lost art form now is, as a manager or an advocate, whatever you want to call him, is getting over your talent. And I think there was nobody better at that than Bobby Heenan.
He was. I think most wrestlers that worked with him, the heat that they got, and the reaction that they got, I think a lot of it, was in large part due to having Heenan as their manager, right? I mean, I think there was only like one guy that I ever heard of that didn't feel like he needed Heenan as his manager, but
who was that?
I think it was Ravishing Rick Rude, I believe.
Really? But
I think everyone else obviously benefited from him, guys that maybe couldn't talk very well, and obviously he was a really good talker, and from his managing days, I think the Rick Rude IC title win was his first championship that he won as far as anybody in his stable, and then shortly after, I believe the Brainbusters won the tag titles, right? And then I think Haku and Andre the Giant eventually had the tag titles leading into WrestleMania 6 or something like that. But I think that was his first. So he kind of got some, he got some good credibility with those guys. And then transitioning into the announcer role over the years, he had a neck injury.
Well, Andre had the title too,
right? Well,
$1 Million Man gave it to him.
Yeah, I guess if you count that.
No, you're right.
But yeah, he had a neck injury that I think led to him no longer being at ringside or being able to get physically involved. I mean, he kind of returned briefly to be with Ric Flair, right, when he came over to the WWF back in the early 90s. So, he was, and him pairing him with Gorilla Monsoon is, of course, one of the most famous announcing tandems that the WWF ever had, and he worked with other announcers. He was really pretty much good with anybody that he worked with, whether it was Vince or, if other guys like Randy Savage or Roddy Piper were in the booth with him. It was always entertaining. And unfortunately for him, after he went to WCW, and then after that ended, he ended up with some health issues in the 2000s. I was fortunate enough to be at the WrestleMania 20 in Madison Square Garden, where the night before he was inducted in the Hall of Fame. So he was actually in the arena for WrestleMania 20. I think that was the last time that I saw him at an event.
Is that when he did the Gimmick Battle Royal?
No, that was 17.
That was 17.
20, he was in the Hall of Fame. He came out and was honored, and he did some backstage skits with Mean Gene Okerlund.
Right.
I think with Moolah and Mae Young, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to go back and watch WrestleMania 20.
My God. I do remember that. Yeah.
That was the last time I ever saw him, at a wrestling show, and we met him at some autograph signings years later. But he was his appearance was much different because of the throat cancer he suffered from and other health issues that he ran into, which was unfortunate over the years. But he stuck it out and fought through it for a very long time, and unfortunately, passed away earlier this week. They had a nice tribute for him, I thought, on Monday. At least they had a nice, an entertaining video package to kind of highlight.
Yeah, it was consistent, too. They kept, Now, so if I say to you, Bobby Heenan, what's the first thing? What's the first either skit, interview, what's the first thing you think of?
Well, I guess I was too young at the time. I wasn't watching live, but when he came out with Andre and challenged Hogan on Piper's Pit, I think is probably one of his most famous moments. He did, I think, most of the talking in that segment, and led Andre, and that was Andre's kind of turn and leading into the match with Hogan. So that's probably one of the first things that I remember with him. And then the Royal Rumble '92, calling it on commentary with Flair.
Yeah,
those are probably the two things that would stick out for me as far as most famous memories for him.
Yeah, I think the call for Rumble '92, was just from bell to bell, was absolutely hilarious. It's not fair to Flair, and then he turns on Piper. That was great stuff. Also, the stuff he did with Gorilla Monsoon on Primetime Wrestling.
Yes.
They had I watched it not too long ago, and they were in the Old West, and and Heenan got blown up and stuff like that. I thought it was really cool, and it sucks to lose a guy like Bobby the Brain Heenan. One of the other things I remember about him was the tribute that he forced Nitro to give to Gorilla Monsoon when Gorilla had passed away.
I just heard that the other day, actually. It was on Peter Rosenberg does, he's on ESPN Radio and Michael Kay show, but he also does some work for WWE. He's a big wrestling fan, and
right.
he mentioned Heenan passing away, and one of the clips that he played was the tribute that he did for Monsoon on Nitro that one year.
Yeah, there was a big hubbub about it because apparently Nitro didn't want to do it, or they didn't they didn't put it in, and Heenan went into business for himself and said that. But also, if you go back and you listen to his call, you said WrestleMania 17 was the Gimmick Battle Royal.
Yeah.
If you listen to his call when he first sits down, you could hear who did he call it with? Mean Gene?
Yeah,
he called it with Mean Gene, and he said he looked over to Mean Gene, and he's like, "How great is this?" And you could tell that it was just what he loved to do, and for him going from a manager to a commentator. It's different because when you're a manager, you're kind of out there doing it yourself. For a commentator, he was very quick-witted. So the back and forth that he had with McMahon and Gorilla Monsoon was, stuff that you don't see today. And if people, I feel like people are just trying too hard. And for Bobby Heenan, it just came naturally. So.
Yeah, he's a naturally entertaining guy, I think. And I didn't see him wrestle much. I know he was a wrestler before he was a manager, and he did a couple of shots, I think, in WWF at the time, just random matches. I think he was in I'm going to forget the WrestleMania, so I don't want to bring it up. But there was a 6-man tag. He was with the Islanders against the Bulldogs and Coco Beware. Might be WrestleMania 4. I'd have to go back and look that up. But he had that whole thing. I think he wore the dogs, the suit to protect himself from the dog.
Yeah, he did because Matilda.
Yeah, Matilda.
Yeah.
So there's things like that. But so I never really got to see him as a wrestler in the ring, but everything else he did was always very very entertaining and very great. Certainly in his WWF days, and Nitro probably didn't get the WCW didn't really use him as much as they or as well as they could have. Maybe he didn't want to do anything beyond just announcing at that point. I'm not sure, but it's unfortunate that it's a voice from your childhood and that stuff that you listen to and you watched when you were a kid, and now he's no longer with us, but a great wrestling personality in the history of the business.
Yeah, and like you said, the WWE did a good job, going over his career. So he's definitely, I'm glad. I guess out of everything I could say, I'm glad he was around to see himself get inducted into the Hall of Fame. That's cool. So sorry to bring everybody down. It wasn't really bringing people down. It was just talking about my Bobby Heenan. So from there, we got a couple things to talk about this week. I feel like we have we could tease it a little later. We have another episode of the 5 Count installment, not an episode, right? Installment.
Sure. I don't know what segment that's going to be on the show. I'm not sure how many segments we have.
Segment 4F. Yeah. 4F for 4 Figures Deep, or the alternate name of the All Night Long Wrestling Podcast, or the In the Red Podcast.
Yeah, there's a lot of names floating around right now.
There sure are. We're going to remind you before we go any further. You can find us on Instagram, on Twitter, at All Night Long WP, Facebook.com/All Night Long. Actually, Facebook.com/ANLWP. I lied. Not even sure that's really it. Find us on Facebook. And aside from that, you can find us on Damage 365 Radio Network.
Everybody, this is Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man, and you are listening to Damage 365 Radio. And remember, everybody's got a price for the $1 Million Man.
It'd be cool if we had commercials so I could take a piss break. I'm just thinking about that.
I could just keep playing those drops over and over again if you want until you come back.
Then it'll be like an episode of SmackDown. Am I right? So I guess speaking of Raw and SmackDown, we have a big pay-per-view coming up this Sunday. Well, event pay-per-view. It's the No Mercy pay-per-view, a Raw exclusive. And we don't want to go too deep into... actually, we're going to go 4 figures deep into Raw and SmackDown. No, we're not. But a couple things about Raw that I wanted to ask you about while we're on the air here. Free balling, as they say. Still not, like I said.
Nope.
No John Cena. No Brock Lesnar.
No Juan Cena, that's true.
Yeah, no Cena, no Lesnar. Do you think that's a big deal going into a pay-per-view?
I don't know, like the Lesnar thing is I don't know what their thought process is on stuff like that, or why they wouldn't schedule him to be there on the show before a pay-per-view that he's wrestling at. So I don't know. I can explain that from the company's perspective, like why you wouldn't just have him appear at a Raw there. Is it a big deal? Not that, probably not, because they've done a ton of these things before where he's not always there every week, and they build up the shows they did that pre-taped interview with them backstage.
Yep, thought that was a good segment too.
So it ended up being probably fine. The Cena thing, I think he was in Japan working for them, so that was just a scheduling thing. Again, I don't know why you would do that on a week before he has a big pay-per-view match. I thought Reigns did fine. I liked his promo this week. It might have been a little better for him or easier for him without having to go
Cena, right?
Back and forth. Yeah. But I thought he did well with it. I was entertained by it. I actually got a kick out of it. So good on Roman for that. It stinks. I don't know what their rating was this week. I didn't see, but you're going up against a Monday night game again. Cena not there, Lesnar not there. The main event was a 5-way match, right? Or 6-pack challenge for the Intercontinental title shot that featured Bo Dallas and Curtis Axel and Jason Jordan in the main event. So,
not for nothing. If that's me and I'm Johnny Q Viewer.
Oh my God, who the hell cares?
Especially with the lack of a response that Jason Jordan is still getting. It's rough, but kudos to Jason Jordan. 2 weeks in a row, he had pretty decent, 3 weeks in a row now, but he had pretty decent matches against Cena and against Roman Reigns, and for him to get this win, but people just aren't invested and people don't really care. I expect him to beat The Miz for the IC title probably on Sunday, but it's there's a lot of stale segments. Another segment that feels stale and dumb to me is Bray Wyatt versus Finn Balor. So the build-up, follow me here. Do you have your pen and paper?
Yeah, it's over there.
Okay, write this down. So Bray